Well, thank you all, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Normally, you don't want to clap until after you've heard us speak, but that's okay. We appreciate it. The term multi-domain command and control stands as one of the Department of Defense's buzzwords these days. However, far from being just a slogan, this concept describes one of the most central concepts to attaining success in modern warfare. Namely, how do actors secure desired effects at the right time and place to best net desired objectives regardless of the domain, service, or system type from which the effect was initiated? Manifesting this vision demands a dynamic, connected, resilient command and control architecture that's a far cry from today's highly centralized, fragile, lineal system. It all comes down to empowering decision-making at the edge with timely, high-quality information, while also allowing real-time teaming between assets in a multi-domain fashion. Now, many new concepts have been postulated that demand a new approach to command and control and are driving the need for this area of focus. You've heard them before: combat cloud, the third offset, mosaic warfare. Those are just a few. And while the details behind these concepts may differ when viewed specifically, it's really encouraging to see that thinking at the macro level is migrating toward the need for a new command and control paradigm, a necessary shift or evolution, if you will, from the notion of centralized control, decentralized execution, to one of unified command, distributed control, decentralized execution. Now, this is going to be a challenging task, as the proliferation of information impacts across the strategic, operational, and tactical levels of execution. Command and control spans all services and all commands. It cannot be found on a budget spreadsheet as a specific program line item, however, nor does it have a single champion, which is part of the challenge. But it is, in fact, the linchpin of what will bring success in future wars. For the potential inherent within military personnel and hardware demands competent execution and ability to do so. A tool is of little use unless harnessed properly in alignment with greater aims. And in many ways, this is the essence of what multi-domain command and control is all about. Today, we're fortunate to have a selection of leaders who are at the cutting edge of working this challenge. Preston Dunlap, who is a chief architect for the Office of Air Force's Assistant Secretary for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Chris Brose, the former staff director at the Senate Armed Services Committee and now head of strategy at Anduril Industries. And Brigadier General Dave Kumashiro, who is the director of Joint Force Integration and the lead of the multi-domain command and control cross-functional team. So let's get started, and we'll hear from Mr. Dunlap first on his views of MDC2 and the challenges he faces. Preston?
Thank you. I wonder if you're here this morning and have ever used Uber, Lyft, or a rideshare app. Raise your hand. Okay, congratulations. You have participated in multi-domain command and control. If you're like me yesterday trying to get out of the parking garage, you might have wished you'd taken Uber to get here. I certainly did. Let me walk you through why I think you participated in that. Well, you have an app that rides on a phone or a tablet that knows your position of those that might help you. It sends that information seamlessly over a network, cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, 3G, 4G, 5G one day. It knows whether you have high connectivity or low connectivity. It knows where you are and where people that can drive you are. And it matches through artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms the right person to the right car. And it does so much more than that. You can look at the screen and you see the situational awareness of where you are and what's around you, and you can watch the car appear to you. You can even coordinate responses and get multiple people riding in the same car. So just like that works for us in our private lives, we too are trying to get our capabilities within seconds to the right place at the right time, to the right target, to the right effect. And I want to argue that it's intuitive and it makes sense. And secondly, I want to be able to explain that I didn't give you an example from the military, but I gave you an example from a booming commercial sector that is trying to solve many of these challenges. And we can harness that and take advantage of that, not just with cars, but with aircraft, satellites, submarines, and people and tanks on the ground. I'd like to show you a short video that our AFWorks, who you just heard and saw, have partnered with this to be able to explain what multi-domain operations is and get some energy behind the components that are available in the commercial world that can help us, even if you don't know anything about DoD or the military, but can get after this problem with this. So let's go ahead and cue that video, please.
Imagine, at any given moment, and in a matter of minutes, the 5 branches of the U.S. military, along with relevant allies and other organizations, merge together as one united team on a mission. They respond to a threat, stage an offensive, save lives in a disaster, and more. Leveraging the latest technology, they have instant and secure access to the most relevant data and information to optimize rapid, effective, AI-assisted decision-making. And they have seamless and instant communication to deploy the right resources to take action. Building a multi-domain operations system requires solutions and automations for each activity that makes up the whole. We need to access data from a wide range of sources and then prepare and present data so we can use it. We need AI-assisted human decision-making. And then we need to instantly communicate the decision to all stakeholders, along with the required actions and resources. We need to simultaneously act to neutralize the threat or avert the crisis. While all this is happening, we need to manage multi-level security requirements and keep the data secure. Finally, we need to integrate these activities into one seamless and resilient system that can accomplish all of this in a matter of minutes.
Well, this is one way that we're trying to explain what it is that we're trying to do to a world that may or may not be familiar with DoD and our challenges. It's applicable in a variety of different operations, humanitarian assistance, strike operations, and it's that integration of capabilities that we see as the power of the effect, working together as a family of capabilities across the U.S. military, intelligence community, our allies and partners. So that's kind of what it is and framing it. I'd like to end with a few minutes describing how we're getting after the problem. What are the Lego blocks that we're trying to build and shape to be able to snap together to achieve effect for multi-domain operations? Let's go to the next slide, please. When we think of multi-domain operations, we sort of see 3 basic pillars or components. Number 1, we need a concept of operations. We need ConOps. How do we fight together as a joint, multi-domain, all-domain capability with our allies and partners? Number 2, next, please. We want to be ready. We need to be trained, equipped, manned, and ready to be able to take on the challenges that we have in a way that we're training to be able to do those ConOps that are truly integrated multi-domain capabilities. And number 3, next, we need to build the technology that supports those new ConOps and the readiness that we need to be able to do that. And then technology is driving at such a rate that that may also change and should necessarily change the way we have our ConOps and our readiness. And so it's the tie left, up, and down, and to the middle. And General Kumashiro is going to be talking more about ConOps and readiness, so let me focus on technology. Next, please. We've got 6 lines of effort that are being pursued rapidly and aggressively in this area. These sort of follow the kill chain thinking, but they're all done in parallel to be able to achieve effects as rapidly as possible. The first category is sensors. We need to tie in publicly available information from the lowest classification up to the highest classification capability that we or our partners have. Number 2, if you could go back, please. Number 2, we've got, Paul, just go back one. Number 2, we need to be able to get data off of those sensors. We need to do that, number 3, securely, and be able to manage that and push that to the right place at the right time. Whether it's SAP, SCI, secret, unclassified, it shouldn't matter. We need to move that seamlessly, just like the commercial world moves secure data back and forth. And number 4, we need to be able to get that data to the right place and follow what we've been doing in about a decade now and separate the way our thinking for software-defined networks, software-defined radios, physical apertures, and be able to move that in a mesh construct back and forth to the right place and respond and heal as necessary. Number 5, that data and information needs to be useful, so we need to push it to the exploitation and artificial intelligence algorithms that can take advantage of the technology to be able to not only get the data to the right place, but also siphon through the data to be able to assist the human decision makers in their situational awareness for space, air, land, and sea, and be able to execute those decisions quickly, machine to machine, either retasking sensors, because I care about a place, I can automatically retask space, air, and land sensors to go after something, or put, as number 6 says, some kind of munition or electronic warfare or cyber effect on target. And finally, if that number 6 category of capabilities, we're looking for smart network weapons, has a sensor on it, and it sees something in its path, we want to be able to reseed that kill chain quickly back to start number 1 again as we go through. And so these are the 6 rough categories with initiatives that we've begun. And next, Paul, we always are thinking of this as an arc-to-fieldable capability. And that's how we're going to get after speed and deliver capability quickly. What that means is every time we do a demonstration or build a technology or do a prototype, we want to see how that is clearly on the path, either in and of itself or next to something that a warfighter can use. Well, how do we do that? Open architecture, open standards. The commercial world does this all the time. That's how things work together. That's how we can get to web pages regardless of the browser that you're on. We want to be cumulative in nature so that when we go do a demonstration and pull together technologies, that each time when something is working well, we just build and build and build and shift where we need to if things aren't going the way we'd like. And that's good. We should fail quickly and cheaply so that we can achieve capability faster. And then we want to integrate that capability. So we're going to do demonstrations in each line of effort roughly every 4 months. We want to bring those together as an integrated package every 6 to 8 months. And that's how we're going to get after this quickly. We're going to compete, we're going to charge ahead, and we're going to do that together with our innovation partners. And so last slide. We're happy to talk to you. General Kumashiro and I have about an hour in a room tomorrow morning for any of the vendors or warfighters that are here that want to chat more about how to get after this. But we've set up partners. We don't think we have the market cornered on all the great ideas, and so we're looking for help from sort of 4 categories. Partners, you all in uniform, and civilians, university-affiliated research centers, federally funded research centers, primes, folks that we work with regularly to help us build our military capability, pioneers, those that have sort of broken kind of new ground in this area, in the commercial world, and we'd like to bring you guys together to be able to talk and be able to achieve this capability quickly. So with that, let me turn it to Chris.
Thank you very much, Preston, and thank you, AFA, for the opportunity to be with you all this morning. I'm a little lazier, so I'm just going to keep sitting here if that's all right with you guys. My perspective on this was shaped largely by the time that I spent nearly a decade on the Senate Armed Services Committee, but really more in the past year that I've spent at Anduril Industries. And for those of you who aren't tracking, Anduril is a 2-year-old venture-backed technology startup. We are a defense company. We were founded with the idea of bringing together people who are deeply expert in defense and military issues, and people who are deeply expert in the kinds of emerging technologies that Preston was talking about, largely that have been working on these technologies for the past decade and a half in the commercial world. So I bring a bit of a non-traditional perspective to this, and I really just want to hit 3 points before we get to the Q&A. First and foremost, I think, when you really boil down what we're trying to do and what we're talking about, what we're trying to do is accelerate the speed of the kill chain, period. I think what we're trying to do is enable airmen to have better understanding, make better decisions, take better actions much faster and much more often than their competitors. And that's something that, I think for the past 3 decades, we've gotten used to a pace and an efficiency of operations that is just not going to hold up in the future, where the Air Force, I think, is going to have to close thousands upon thousands of kill chains a day in a peer-type conflict. So the type of approach that you're going to have to bring into this is, systems that are and processes that are highly autonomous and highly intelligent. which kind of brings me to my second point, which I think flows directly out of what I heard Acting Secretary Donovan say yesterday. Multi-domain command and control, I think, is primarily a software problem, far more than it is a hardware problem. When you look at it that way, I think it gives you a very different perspective on the problem that we're talking about. From the perspective of software, there are no domains, there are no platforms. These are just ultimately nodes in a network, and you want each of those nodes to be able to sense and shoot and share information. That is something that is very doable. It's something, as Preston said, happens every single day in the commercial world. And the amount of information that is going to be generated by those nodes is exponentially larger than what we're dealing with today. And as many of you know far better than I, we're drowning in that information now. So the only way you're going to deal with and make sense of that information is through increasing automation. There are many things that artificial intelligence cannot do well yet. Processing sensor data is not one of them. AI, well-trained algorithms can eat through large quantities of sensor data and help human beings interpret it, structure it, fuse it, make sense of what's going on in the world, and generate understanding from it. Much of the processing of that information can be done right at the edge of the network because of advances in distributed computing. So you can essentially have sensors and systems that are running those sensors that are petting their own information and interpreting the world themselves. This is something that is doable right now. And because you have these systems that are capable of making sense of the world, you can have high degrees of autonomy, high degrees of intelligence in these systems. They can do far more by themselves without direct human control, which allows you to fundamentally invert the way we've built battle networks for a very long time, which is rather than having large amounts of human beings required to make one machine operationally relevant, you can now have a single human being commanding and leading large numbers of machines single-handedly. And that fundamentally changes the way that you build networks. Rather than the sort of centralized and concentrated way that General Deptula mentioned, you can now create networks that are physically distributed, physically reconfigurable, self-healing, far more resilient, far more secure than what we have today, which is how we're going to need to operate in the future. And that sort of brings me to my last point, which I think very much follows from what Preston just said, which is this is doable now. These technologies, the underlying technologies, are here now. We're not talking about photon torpedoes and magic. We are talking about technologies that, as Preston mentioned, most of us use every single day. It's technologies that Anduril is using to build defense capabilities every single day. These are things that exist. This is how artificial intelligence is helping us to make sense of the information that we collect and retain on our mobile devices. The kinds of edge computer processing, CPUs and GPUs that I mentioned are running inside of self-driving cars. They're in the Teslas that I passed in the parking lot that have computers on board them that are hundreds of times more powerful than the most powerful computer and the most capable weapons system inside of the Department of Defense. So this is something that exists, and you can build defense capabilities and networks differently as a result of it. I think the point that Preston mentioned, which I was going to make, is exactly right. The way you link sensors to shooters and targets to weapons is the exact same way that I got here this morning, which is pairing riders to drivers through Lyft and Uber and apps like that. So this is something that's doable now. And just to kind of close on a bit of a personal note, I'm asked a lot why, when I left government, I joined a very small technology company that nobody has ever heard of. And it's largely because these technologies can be brought to bear to help solve defense problems like the one we're talking about here. I think there are many technology companies that aren't interested in trying to help you solve this problem and aren't interested in trying to help you. Anduril is an exception in that regard. We were founded to help solve problems like this, or help solve problems like this, to help make the jobs and the missions that all of you have to do better and more successful. And it's something that we're very excited to try to be a part of, and I'm honored to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. General Deptula, thank you, number one, for, again, just the intellectual and academic rigor that you continue to bring to the forefront for our Air Force to move forward. And I'd also like to say thank you to the teaming that we have up here, because it really is representative of some of the challenges and the requirements that we need to get at this very, very challenging problem. So I work hand in hand with Preston, and we go to a lot of meetings to kind of discuss all of these things that are facing our Air Force and our Joint Force and how we get at it. And again, I could not have a better partner, so thank you. And then also with Chris Brose, and this really extends to everyone who is out in industry there. This is so incredible, the teaming that we need to move forward and to move quickly to get at this problem of multi-domain command and control. So as many of you know, I am the cross-functional team lead for multi-domain command and control. And so what does that mean? And so what I want to do very quickly is just to bring us back to where General Goldfie and our Chief of Staff started this journey for our Air Force back in 2016 and 2017. Many of you in this room know or are aware of the big rocks, some of these focus areas that he really wanted to get at when he took over as our Chief of Staff. First and foremost was revitalizing squadrons. Second was strengthening joint teams and leaders. And third was advancing multi-domain command and control. And this was 2016 and 2017 that our chief had that vision to get at a problem that only now our joint community is really trying to tackle and wrestle with. Alongside that, many of the leaders in this room, General Holmes included, General Fay, General Fantini, the stand-up of the Air Force warfighting integration capability. That organization to really do the integration and the horizontal networking that we need to deliver the capabilities that our warfighters need. So from these three big rocks, we stood up a enterprise capability collaboration team, an ECC team that my predecessor, Brigadier General Saltzman, now Major General Saltzman, helped lead. And from that, three big outputs came from that team of which Preston mentioned. Really, it's the need for operating concepts for multi-domain command and control. Next was the readiness or the people that we need to enable that, and then the advanced technologies. And so we look at the advanced technologies. Preston has done an extraordinary job along with his team to encapsulate that in this concept of the advanced battle management family of systems, platform agnostic, to get to the technology that we need to network and understand and truly deliver multi-domain command and control to the warfighters. So on our side, in AFWIC, it's really about how we deliver those operating concepts and the readiness to the warfighter. And that's difficult. And that's been the extraordinary challenge that we've been facing. Because if there's one way that I could describe it with what Preston and Chris had mentioned before, I'd just say hashtag ditto. I'd say hashtag that was easy, because it seems real easy to do that. But the devil is in the details and how we actually get that out to the warfighter. And so within the operating concepts, we have several lines of effort that we're working towards. And I have to say, this isn't the perfect solution. That multi-domain command and control is organic. Although we can be deliberate in some areas, the network, the advanced network and technologies that we're talking about require us to be adaptive and agile at all times. But we are doing lines of experimentation. We are doing war games that really tackle some of the challenges that our combatant commanders and our warfighters need addressed. We are looking at operating concepts like Mosaic that AFA and DARPA have presented. And then really recognizing that mission command on top of all of the technologies that we're talking about are critical, particularly when we're in the joint environment. And then moving on to the readiness, making sure that our organizations are postured and prepped and prepared to move forward. Whether it being with the Shadow Ops Center, which has just been designated as the Joint All-Domain Command and Control Battle Lab by the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, or whether it's the innovation hubs that we have spread out through our Air Force and through DoD, whether it's the software factories that have been established to get at this problem, this networked architecture, the software-enabled networks and equipment that we need. All of this encapsulated to move us forward to get what this vision of multi-domain command and control is. We're not there yet, and we need everyone in this room to help us get there. And we don't have all the good ideas. And so that's what my challenge is to you, to our airmen out there, to our Air Force, to our industry partners, to help us to get to that vision of multi-domain command and control.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for those insights. The audience has forwarded a whole series of, if I may say so, excellent questions. So we'll jump right in, and we've left plenty of time. So those of you who still have questions, please send them in. Here's a really good one to kick off. Uber, Lyft, etc. are susceptible to single-point failure limited to GPS capability. How do we create a redundant, capable system of systems that's an open architecture construct that isn't vulnerable to physical, cyber, or electronic attack? Also, many active duty military members experience the typical comm network outages for multiple hours, multiple days per week. I'll just add, if you notice me go off stage, the reason I went off stage is because this thing stopped working. How will the MDC2 effort build in contact safeguards to ensure confidence and reliability? Anybody?
Oh, I feel your pain. I work at the Pentagon. We don't have it much better. I think what you need to be thinking about is designing the networks to be, robust and resilient and redundant, but also assume that it won't be that way when you need it. The commercial world, not to kind of overuse the examples, but we tend to build things and ensure first that they work in a sort of pristine environment with complexities. That's not always the case when, say, a commercial telecom company is working through their system. They tend to start with first the degraded environment and then build additional. Sort of start with the 1 bar on your cell phone, not the 5 bars on your cell phone. I think we've got to have that mentality where we're in a world that you cannot have 100% assured perimeter cyber defense. And so we have to be able to ensure that as we design the system, we can do that. So that means that we need to be humble and interested and accepting of practices that work across the community and across the commercial world, not just our own usual practices. And then be able to pull in the ability to make rapid change. Chris mentioned, and so did many folks yesterday at the talk about the Air Force is sort of the coolest tech company on the planet and moving to a digital software company. And if you can move at the speed of digits, you can also respond quickly to what's happening. And so that's a fundamental technology shift here that can get after that. And I think that's going to be some critical sort of components of this.
And just real quickly, obviously this doesn't happen in a stovepipe. So again, I see Mr. Marion out there in the audience. Enterprise IT as a service, our digital Air Force. How, again, from a large Air Force perspective, do we get at this ability to ensure that that network is resilient, is redundant, and has that capability that the individual asked the question, that we have that capability for the warfighter?
Okay, here's another one. We're hearing so much about MDC2 this week as a SecDef priority and, of course, the Air Force focus. How are we coordinating with the other branches to make this happen? Are they using the same language, acquiring systems with the mosaic concept in mind? How can our systems be better integrated? Chris, you have the opportunity to work with all the services. What are your observations on that topic?
I was just about to defer to General Kumashiro on that one. I would step back and make an observation from the outside. I think that the way that you're ultimately going to get there, there are different languages in the services. I think they're speaking about it differently. They're approaching the problem somewhat differently. But I think the good news from the outside is that each of the services realizes that this is a priority and they're seeking to get after it. I tend to think that the best way to get after problems like that is largely more from the bottom up. I think clear prioritization and top cover from the top is necessary, but really allowing the services to collaborate and experiment together to sort of feel their way into the future incrementally, but nonetheless pretty decisively, I think is ultimately the way we're going to get where we all want to go.
And I'll just add on, obviously, we have some challenges in terms of that integration piece. Alongside the stand-up of the Shadow Ops Center at Nellis as this Joint All-Domain Command and Control Battle Lab, the same memo that the Joint Requirements Oversight Council approved was the initial stand-up of the Joint All-Domain Command and Control cross-functional team. So obviously, from an organizational perspective, that will be led by the joint staff, with all services participating. But as Chris mentioned, what we have to be careful is the bureaucracy doesn't get in the way of what we need to do to make this happen quickly and rapidly. I can tell you just from experience, we have lots of joint service integration that's occurring at much, much lower levels. You take Shadow Ops Center itself. The team, the Air Force team, is out there already working with Army and Navy and Marine Corps. And it's happening in other innovation hubs as well. So we can't let all of just the exquisite architectures that we would like designed into it. We have to understand that there's going to be a bit more organic as we go through and find our path to a multi-domain command and control universe.
I think I'd like to be really positive on this one. So I've watched this over a number of years, inside and outside of government, and the exciting thing that we have now is that each of the service chiefs, though the language may shift or left or right in exact vocabulary, they're all prioritizing the ability to work as a team and integrate. Whether that's called UDA or multi-domain operations or multi-domain command and control or joint all-domain, they're all talking the same language. And so the fact that the senior-most military and civilian members across the Pentagon are all pushing and driving their enterprises to be able to achieve this integrated effect, for us doing the technology development, that's just extremely helpful because there's unity of effort and focus there to be able to do that. On the technology level, the relationships that we have with those service partners so that we can move messages and information back and forth across the intelligence community and DoD and the services in there, or elements that the Air Force, and I'm sure the other services as well, but certainly we have actually resourced to be able to ensure that as part of these 4 to 8 month demonstration cycles that we're resourcing the integration of capabilities, not just Air Force capabilities, but other service capabilities. So we're putting our money where our mouth is.
Very good. Here's another one. Accumulation of data sources and normalization of data across the spectrum, as well as proper implementation of artificial intelligence and machine learning, requires a large increase in data scientists and analysts across the services. Is there a strategy? If so, what is the strategy for elevating the resources required to make this a reality?
So I'll take that on just from my former role as Director of General Officer Management and Executive Talent Management. And again, I'll have to say that we're not there yet, and we need to get there. And our former secretary obviously recognized that as a capability gap that we have in our Air Force. And so I don't have the best answers for you, but I know our airmen have the answers out there. And so working together to really get to those types of skill sets that we need, whether it's in software development, whether it's in the technical pieces to understand all of these networks and how they interact. But with that being said, we also continue to need the warfighters that are out there that understand how to deliver effects across all domains to hold our adversary at risk. And so that's one of the challenges we'll face in terms of balancing that tension.
I don't have the institutional answer, but I will just say that as we've seen both the headquarters as well as across the force develop, positions like myself, Chief Architect of Staff AQ, but I'm seeing that across our program executive offices, across the major commands, chief data officers. So the mentality shift from sort of procedural acquisition to not only doing that sort of well and better than anybody else, but also wake up in the morning and think as an acquisition individual, civilian, or officer, how I can propel capability faster and smarter and leaner every single day. That's just an exciting mission to wake up in the morning to. So I'm actually seeing a positive shift towards people getting more excited and energized about how to do that. as we support it. I appreciate General Kumashiro and others that are trying to get the personnel, enterprise that we have, being able to onboard, attract, and retain and support talent to be able to get after that. But these kinds of challenges that we're talking about this week are those that I think really excite those kind of individuals. We have to get after the data. We have to get after AI and machine learning. And I'm seeing a lot of that sort of begin to happen. And that's also created cool pathways to things like Chris's company and others that are out there trying to make the way and become a capability that can actually sort of deliver large effects. And that partnership with that small business community or the sort of larger community that's pushing on this allows us to not only have our own talent, but have better relationships with those on the outside that have those skill sets.
Okay, we talked a bit about personnel and the way folks approach these issues. Here's another one that's related. How are we going to encourage commanders to accept the risk of following an artificial intelligence recommended course of action despite the fact that they can't ask why it's making that recommendation?
I'll jump on that one, and I'll use actually the Uber and Lyft example. I mean, we do that all the time with Waze. And I used Waze on the way here. My brother was driving with me. Tells you where those speed traps are, tells you where the potholes are, tells you where the stopped vehicle is, tells you what direction to go if there is traffic or if there's some type of construction zone. So we actually use it right now. And as Preston had mentioned earlier, our airmen, they're ready. They're ready to acknowledge and take this risk. We just as an organization have to let them take that risk. Let them fail fast if necessary, and then get up and try again.
If I could, just a brief word on that. I think we too often jump to the assumption that a lot of these technologies are so new that the way we have thought about developing technology, fielding technology in the past somehow doesn't apply anymore. I think the way that those airmen are going to learn to trust these new capabilities is the exact same way that they've learned to trust every capability that they use. They train on it. They test it to ensure that it does the thing that they need it to do reliably and predictably and repeatedly. And in the process of that, they build trust that when they say that something needs to happen or that they need to send a system out into the world to create an effect, that it's going to do what it's done in training. I don't think that this is as confusing as so often the dialogue makes it out to be. I think it's much more of an extension and an outgrowth of the way that airmen build trust in their capabilities and understand its capabilities and limitations every single day. And as General Kumashiro mentioned, many of these are technologies that we've been using and are become very familiar with, and it's less about why the systems are making decisions and what decisions they're recommending, and whether those are decisions that we have tested and seen to work repeatably and predictably in training.
Just say too on the technology side. So three thrusts, right? ConOps, readiness, and technology. Technology, we the Air Force call Advanced Battle Management Family of Systems. But what General Kumashiro is leading in partnership with the Joint Staff and the other services is that sort of sandbox to be able to test out those capabilities and gain comfort to be able to do that. And that tagline, as we think of multi-domain operations, we think of that sort of secure, networked, AI-enabled advanced battle management capability. So that enabled by AI is something where we're going to be training and testing and trying every 4 to 6 months as we work through the system, and we'll learn what works and what doesn't, and what our comfort levels are under what circumstances as we go forward.
I'm just going to add in real quick. I apologize. So my background. So in 2002 and 2004, I was in the early stages of Predator. Where we did remote split operations, meaning we flew Predator from far-off locations over Afghanistan and Iraq. And then we also strapped on a Hellfire missile to that. And then we also strapped on other technologies as those technologies became realized. So again, that level of risk-taking and innovation really actually inspired me to be where I am today. I can tell you right now, I would not be here if I didn't have that freedom of movement that the Predator technologies allowed us. Every day was something different, and we were making an impact. And this is what MDC2 is. MDC2 is about making that impact to the warfighter. Again, we just have to get out of the way of our airmen and let them do it.
I think that's great. In listening to all of your answers, one of the things that struck me is in developing trust. You mentioned Waze and Uber. You know, there are a couple times driving into work, I decided Waze wasn't as smart as I was, and so I took an alternate route. And I've done that 3 or 4 times and figured out that Waze is actually smarter than I am. So, you know, I began to trust it. And the next time, okay, I'm not going to go on Route 50. I will take the alternate route. So I think developing trust is a way to build that confidence with what AI can contribute. All right, what's the Air Force and/or the Department of Defense doing to modify proprietary contracts and systems that limit our ability to share and move information freely between networks, platforms, and weapon systems?
There's actually a whole panel, I think, going on right now talking about that down the hall. Certainly it's one of the main issues. We're talking about partnering with industry. So I think this is one of those areas that, the companies have learned over time, depending on your strength or not strength in your market spaces, how open or not you are to others being able to operate within your environment. What we're talking about here is sort of a need to partner to be able to move seamlessly between capabilities and integrate capabilities. You know, the commercial world has currently kind of been working through this with 5G. We did it with Blu-ray technologies a long time ago. What's the standard that we go with? How do we make capabilities interoperable? And so we're making sort of strong initiatives in the acquisition community to be able to get our capabilities to be not only open and modular, but also have the ability to be able to move the data back and forth, which means that the government needs to be able to have the ability to do that in a useful and strong manner. But we also want to be able to protect the profitability and the support of the companies that make them viable sort of commercial institutions. And so the team is working through that sort of very steadily. The main point is that if you want to sort of partner with the Air Force and the other services in this way, you've got to come to the table saying the whole point is to integrate and work together as a set of capabilities. And so how can you, as a commercial company, whether you're sort of a small business prospect, you're one of those sort of game-changing pioneers in the world, or a traditional, prime or partner, you're going to come to the table and say, my goal here is to be able to share information and move back because I need to be part of a technology ecosystem, and I need to set up my business and my relationships with the government and services in a way that does that, because that is the point.
Okay, you all mentioned to one degree or another that MDC2 is largely a software problem. I might argue that our processes and rules of engagement also need to be tackled. How are we looking beyond the technical part and getting the other services, agencies, and our own Air Force A staff on board with what you're envisioning for the technical future?
So I'll take that on. I've only been in the position for about 4 months, and during that period of time, one of the things that I've understood is the greatest challenges with multi-domain command and control is almost less about the warfighting piece, and it's about the decision advantage that we have within the boardroom and how we make decisions, and understand the complexity of the technologies that we're about to employ and how we integrate and synchronize across all domains. Key with that is also the decision science piece of it. And I know our vice chief, he might be actually talking about this tomorrow, but one of the pieces is how do we look at decision making as it integrates with these technologies? How are Gen Xers different from millennials in terms of how Gen Z might make decisions in a VR environment, in a Merc chat room? And so these are the things that we need to get at in terms of the decision-making piece of it. But we also have to understand the policies that interfere, again, with our ability to realize what multi-domain command and control is, whether it's multi-level security and cross-domain solutions, or whether it's how we actually integrate and incorporate and synchronize mission command with those technologies.
Okay, well, I tell you what, I think that that's a great way to wrap this up. We're coming to the end of our time. For those of you who are interested in more information on this subject, Please pick up one of the Mitchell Institute publications out there on Command and Control, Combat Cloud, or Mosaic Warfare, and please join me in thanking our panelists this morning for their